The mob was already forming when Vola Steeljaw walked through the gates of Crossmark. Simon Shelby heard them from the kitchen of the Anvil and Ale, the crossroads in he'd run for 6 years at the edge of the border market, and he wiped his hands on his apron and stepped out into the gray morning light, because in 6 years he had learned that mobs in Crossmark never boded well for his roof tiles or his signpost. He rounded the corner of the building and stopped dead. She was enormous. That was the first thing, the undeniable physical fact of her, standing in the open dirt square of the market with iron chains looped from her wrists to a post driven into the trading ground. And even chained, she was the most commanding presence Simon had ever seen in his life. She stood easily 6'2", maybe 3, with the broad-shouldered, deep-chested build of someone who had been forging and fighting since before she could read. Her skin was a deep sage green, smooth and unmarked except for a diagonal scar that ran from her left cheekbone down toward her jaw, and her jaw was heavy and strong and set like iron, which Simon supposed was how she'd earned whatever name she carried. Her tusks were short and curved and pale as bone. Her dark hair was pulled back in a thick rope braid that fell between her shoulder blades. She was wearing fitted travel leathers, a laced warrior's bodice of dark brown hide that hugged her torso close, with brass ring fastenings up the front, and high-waisted breeches of the same dark leather tucked into boots that came to the knee. A belt sat low on her hips, empty of its weapons, which Simon could see piled in the dirt not 10 feet away where someone had thrown them. The outfit left her arms bare from the bicep down, and those arms were something. She looked like someone had carved a woman out of a mountain and taught her to breathe. She was not crucially afraid. She was looking at the mob the way a patient general regards a disorganized skirmish with assessment, not panic. There were 30 people in the crowd, maybe 35. Simon recognized most of them. Hardin the grain merchant who owed him for 6 months of lodging credit, Bess Carroll from the weaving stall, 2 of the border guards in their brown leather half-armor, though they stood back from the ring of people and watched with the careful inattention of men who did not want to be blamed for whatever happened next. Standing closest to the chained orc woman was a man Simon did not like and had never liked, Aldrich Fenn, who dealt in what he called recovered goods and what everyone else in Crossmark knew were stolen Orc clan trade goods. Fenn was heavyset and wore his prosperity loudly, with a fur-trimmed coat in summer and a gold ring on every finger he could manage. Fenn was talking. Of course he was talking. He was always talking. She came through the Thornwall gate without proper bond papers, Fenn was saying, loud enough for everyone to hear. That means she's an unclaimed raider on human soil. Border law gives me the right to hold her until she's assessed. She can work off her toll in the processing yard, or she can go back to her hoard. The orc woman said nothing. She was watching Fenn the way you watch a rat that has gotten into the flour, with a complete and practical intention to deal with the problem as soon as circumstances allowed. Simon looked at the chains. He looked at the pile of her weapons. He looked at Aldrich Fenn's gold rings and his fur-trimmed coat and his 30 friends with their righteous faces. Then he looked at the orc woman again, and she turned her dark eyes on him at exactly that moment, and something in her gaze said, "I see you assessing this situation, and I am very interested in what you decide." Simon took a breath. He had never been a large man. He was 31 years old, medium height and lean in the way of a man who worked hard every day without eating quite enough, with brown hair that needed cutting and hands that were scarred from kitchen work and the occasional bar fight. He was ordinary in almost every way that people use the word ordinary to mean forgettable. He owned an inn at a crossroads. He had a good cellar and a bad chimney, and no family he kept in contact with. He was, by every conventional measure, no one. He walked into the crowd. People moved for him, partly because he was known and partly because he was walking with a particular kind of purposeful calm that suggested he was not planning to stop. He went directly to the post where the chains were secured, and he crouched down and looked at the lock. "Shelby," Fenn said, his voice dropping into warning territory. "Step back from that." "What's the bond fee?" Simon said. He was not looking at Fenn. He was looking at the lock, which was a standard border market chain lock with a 3-bar mechanism, and he had a key for those behind the counter of the Anvil and Ale because travelers lost them all the time. What? The bond fee. If she entered without bond papers, then there's a fee schedule. What is it? He stood up and looked at Fenn directly. Because if there's a legal fee, I'll pay it. And if there isn't a legal fee, then those chains come off right now and the border guards over there get to explain in writing why they allowed an unlawful detention in the open market. Which one is it, Aldrich? The crowd had gone very quiet. One of the border guards shifted his weight. The other one stared at the sky. Fenn's face went through several colors. She doesn't have a sponsor. She does now. Simon reached into the pocket of his apron. He had 11 silver coins and a brass trading token and the key to his cellar. He put the 11 silver on the top of the post, stacking them in a neat, deliberate column. That covers the standard bond fee through the end of the market season, which I know because I sponsored Hardin's Kethani supplier last autumn and paid the same rate. Someone get me a bond ledger, or take the chains off. Pick one. The silence stretched. It had that particular texture that silences get in crowds when everyone is waiting for someone else to be the first to back down. Aldrich Fenn was not a man who backed down easily, but he was a man who understood liability, and 2 border guards standing right there meant that whatever happened next was going to be documented. He jerked his chin at one of his people. Give him the key. The key was produced. Simon caught it and went to the orc woman's chains. He had to reach up to work the lock at her wrists. She was taller than him by a significant margin, and he was very aware of her watching him from above as he fumbled with the mechanism. The lock clicked and the chains fell. He stepped back. She stood for a moment, rubbing her wrists. Then she looked at Simon with an expression he could not read at all. The crowd began to break up, reluctantly, like water finding a way around a stone. Fenn left last, with a look that promised this was not finished, which Simon filed away for future worry. The orc woman bent and picked up her weapons from the dirt, a short-handled axe, a long knife, a recurved bow and a quiver that she slung over her shoulder. She did it without hurry, without drama, and when she straightened up she was taller than ever and her dark eyes were on Simon again. Vola Steeljaw, she said. Her voice was low and even and slightly rough, the way voices get when they're used to carrying over wind. The Keth clan, out of the northern pass. I came to trade iron and I have a proper bond paper. It is in my pack which that man took when his people pulled my weapons. Fenn's people took your pack. And my horse. Simon closed his eyes briefly. Of course they did. He opened them. Simon Shelby. I run the inn at the north end of the market. Come on, then. She looked at him for another moment. Then she fell into step beside him, and Simon was extremely aware of the way every remaining head in the market square turned to watch them go. The Anvil and Ale was not much to look at from the outside, 2 stories of timber and river stone, with a covered porch and a sign that had needed repainting for 3 years. Inside it was warm and smelled of wood smoke, and the pork and barley soup Simon had started before breakfast, and it had the particular lived-in comfort of a place that has been tended carefully by one person for a long time. The common room had 8 tables and a long bar with a shelf of decent bottles behind it, and a pair of lanterns that gave the whole space an amber glow even in the daytime. There was a fireplace big enough to stand in, though Simon rarely bothered with a full fire in summer. Vola stopped in the doorway and looked at the ceiling. The ceiling was just over 7 feet at its highest point, which meant she could stand upright without issue, though only just. She looked around the room with the careful attention of someone whose survival has historically depended on quickly understanding new spaces, and then she looked at Simon. You have a problem with your chimney, she said. I know. Flashing above the left flue is pulling away from the stone. You'll have water coming in before autumn. Simon blinked. I know, he said, slightly differently this time. I've been meaning to fix it. I can fix it. She set her weapons on the bar with the easy familiarity of someone who has been putting weapons on bars her whole life. If you help me get my pack and horse back from Fenn, I will fix your chimney. and I will work through the market season if you need additional labor. I can lift things." She said the last sentence with a sort of dry precision that made Simon want to smile, though he restrained it in the interest of maintaining any kind of professional composure. "Let's start with the pack," he said. Getting the pack back from Finn took most of the morning and required Simon to involve the senior border guard, whose name was Captain de la Marche, and who was a practical woman with no patience for paperwork backlog, and who, upon being presented with the full account of the morning's events, expressed herself on the subject of Aldrich Finn in terms that Simon found both deeply satisfying and not suitable for this account. The pack was returned. The horse, a heavy-set gray with a genuinely unpleasant temperament that bit at the stable boy, and seemed to find this funny, was retrieved from Finn's yard. The bond paper was in the pack, as Vola had said, correctly filed and stamped by the Thornwall Gate clerk 3 days prior. Captain Marsh looked at it, looked at Vola, and looked at Simon. "He chained her in the open market," she said. "Yes," said Simon, "with a valid paper in her pack that his people took." "Yes." Marsh was quiet for a long moment. Then she said, "I'm going to be very busy with paperwork this afternoon. Keep her out of Finn's sight." She walked away. Simon understood this as the most support he was going to get. He walked back through the market with Vola and her gray horse at his side, and he was thinking about Aldrich Finn's face when the chains came off, and about the way Finn had said this was not finished, and he thought that the border market at Crossmark was about to become considerably more complicated than usual. He had no idea. The Kethclan trade goods were still in crates at the Thornwall Gate warehouse: iron fittings, tool blanks, horseshoes, and a crate of something that turned out to be the most beautiful hand-forged hinges Simon had ever seen, perfectly matched and beautifully wrought in dark iron. Vola oversaw their transport to the market stalls with an efficiency that suggested she had done this many times, and by midday she had her display set up and her first human buyers examining her work with the particular wariness that humans in border markets always showed before they saw the quality, and then with the hunger that quality always eventually produced. Simon went back to his inn. He made the soup. He served the midday trade, which was light in summer because the market moved slowly in the heat. He thought about Aldrich Finn. He thought about the way Vola had looked at him when he crouched down to work the lock on her chains. That expression he couldn't read, and he decided that he was reading too much into a stranger's face. She came in at the end of the day's trading, leading her gray horse around to his stable with the ease of someone who is used to making herself at home in strangers' barns. Simon heard the horse's unpleasant whinnying from the kitchen and went out to find her settling the animal with practiced hands, talking to it in low Orc dialect that the horse seemed to actually respond to, which said something interesting about both the horse and the woman. "I'll need a room," she said without turning around. "I have 3 open. The one with the roof access is best." Simon stopped. "How do you know I have a room with roof access?" She did turn then, and she was amused. It sat strangely and beautifully on her strong face, that amusement like sunlight on iron. "I looked at your roofline when we came in. There is a small window at the east end of the 2nd floor that does not match the others. It is older and set higher. That is a roof hatch." "It's a storage room," Simon said, "but there's a proper room next to it with a good window and a real bed." "Is the bed long enough?" He looked at her. She was at least a foot taller than the average traveler. "I'll add an extension frame tonight," he said. "I have the boards." She studied him. He was getting used to being studied by her. "Most innkeepers would give me the storage room," she said. "I'm not most innkeepers." "No," she said, "you are not." She turned back to her horse. "I will take the room. I will pay in iron coin." He watched the line of her back as she worked and thought about nothing in particular. She fixed the chimney the next morning. She went up on the roof at dawn when it was cool enough to work, and she had it done properly done, with mortar and the right angle on the flashing. By the time Simon had finished making breakfast for his 4 current guests, he stood in the yard and watched her descend from the roof with the easy confidence of someone for whom heights were just another surface, her boots finding purchase on the sloped timber with casual expertise, and she dropped the last 6 feet to the ground and landed without drama. "It will hold through 3 winters if you oil the flashing before each cold season," she said. "Thank you," he said. "Breakfast is inside." She ate 3 times what his other guests ate, with the uncomplicated appetite of someone who had been doing physical work since dawn, and she ate the pork and barley without comment until she put down her bowl and said, "This is very good." "I have a decent hand with soup," Simon said. "It's almost my only skill." She looked at him across the table. The morning light was coming through the common room windows, and it fell across her face in long bars. And Simon noticed again how striking she was, not in the soft or delicate way of the word, but in the way of something tremendous and beautifully formed. "You negotiated my release in a hostile crowd with 11 silver coins and a key," she said. "That is not a man with only one skill." Simon looked at his soup. "Anyone would have done it." "No," she said flatly, "they would not." There was a short silence. "Why did you come alone?" Simon asked. "Keth clan traders usually come in pairs at minimum." Something moved behind her eyes. "My trade partner is dead. His name was Oruk. He was my cousin, and he was killed in a raid from the Iron Fang clan 2 months ago. I came alone because the Keth clan needs iron coin, and the iron does not sell itself." She said it plainly, with the careful flatness of someone who has not finished grieving but does not have the time for it right now. Simon said nothing for a moment. Then he said, "I'm sorry about your cousin." She looked at him. "He would have liked your soup." It was not a thing Simon had expected her to say, and it was somehow exactly the right thing, and he felt the grief in it and the warmth in it simultaneously. He refilled her bowl without asking. The border market at Crossmark ran on a monthly cycle, 10 days of trading, 5 days of settlement, then a week's rest before the next cycle opened. In good years, 3 or 4 Orc clan traders would come through Thornwall Gate, setting up alongside human merchants who sold grain and cloth and manufactured goods, trading iron and bonework and the fine leather goods that only the Orc clans knew how to tan properly. There was always tension, and there was always, underneath the tension, genuine need. Humans needed Orc iron. Orc clans needed human grain. The market existed because both sides had long since accepted that the alternative was worse. This particular cycle was already strange before Vola's arrival. Simon had heard the rumors for 2 weeks that the Iron Fang clan, which ranged across the northern highlands and had been growing more aggressive since their war chief changed 2 seasons ago, was raiding south along the mountain roads. 3 supply wagons had gone missing on the pass road. A border garrison had been reinforced. Captain Marsh had been running double patrols and looking more tired every day. On the 3rd day of the market cycle, a rider came through the Thornwall Gate with news that stopped trading cold. Simon heard about it from Hardin, who had heard it from the gate clerk, who had heard it from the rider's own mouth before the man had even dismounted. The Iron Fang war band, 300 strong, possibly more, was moving south. They had broken the treaty they'd signed 4 years ago, the one that established the Thornwall as a recognized border. They were not coming to trade. They were coming to raise. Crossmark was the only settlement of any size within 3 days' ride. It had a timber palisade, a garrison of 40 border guards, and a population of roughly 800 people, half of them market visitors who would scatter the moment the news spread widely enough. Simon heard all of this and went directly to find Vola. She was at her stall, which she had set up under the market's central oak tree because the shade was good and the foot traffic was high. She was demonstrating the balance of one of her axe heads to a human buyer when Simon arrived, and she looked up and read his face before he said a word and handed the axe back to the buyer with a brief apology in common speech and stepped away from the stall. "What happened?" she said. It was not a question. "Iron Fang," he said. 300. Coming south along the pass road. Her face did not change exactly, but it shifted, something going cold and still behind her eyes in the way of a person doing rapid calculation. "How long?" The rider said 4 days at the pace they were making, could be 3 if they pushed. She was quiet for a moment. Iron Fang, she repeated, and there was something in the way she said it that was not fear but was close to something older and more personal. Drath Ironbane's clan. You know them. They killed my cousin, she said simply. I know them. Simon looked at her. In the dappled light under the old oak, with her arms crossed and her jaw set and her dark eyes distant, she looked like exactly what she was. A woman who had already survived one encounter with the thing that was now coming, and who was doing a very specific kind of arithmetic about what that meant. The garrison commander is calling a defense council for tonight, he said. Will you come? She looked at him. Why would they want me there? Because you know Iron Fang tactics and they don't, and because you are the only person in Crossmark right now who has actually seen these people fight. She was quiet again. They will not trust an orc in their war council. I know, Simon said, but I'll be there, and I'll argue for you. He paused. If you want to go, you don't owe this town anything. You could leave tonight and be safe before they arrive. She looked at him steadily. He had the sense of being weighed, which by now was beginning to feel familiar. Then she uncrossed her arms and said, I will not leave. Even though they chained you in the market square 3 days ago. You unchained me, she said. That counts for something. He did not know what to say to that, so he said nothing, and she went back to her stall and resumed her trading with precisely the same focused efficiency as before, and Simon thought that she was either the bravest person he had ever met or the most impractical one, and then thought that perhaps those were not mutually exclusive. The defense council was held in the garrison hall, which was a long stone building that smelled of leather and old smoke, and had maps pinned to every available wall. Garrison Commander Aldous Price was a former regular army man in his 50s with a white scar through his left eyebrow and the permanently weathered face of someone who had spent decades outdoors. He looked at Vola when Simon brought her in, and his expression cycled through surprise, calculation, and resignation in approximately 4 seconds. Aldrich Fenn was also there, and his expression was considerably simpler. Absolutely not, he said. She survived an Iron Fang raid 2 months ago, Simon said. She watched their tactics from inside the attack. Sit down, Aldrich. This is a military council. Then let's act like it, Captain Marsh said from the other side of the table, and Fenn sat down. Vola looked at the maps. She was quiet for a long time, tracing the pass road with one green finger, and the room was quiet around her because even the people who didn't trust her could feel that she was thinking with the specific purposefulness of someone who knew something useful. Then she began to talk. She talked for 40 minutes. Iron Fang tactics under Drath Ironbane, their new war chief, relied on speed and terror rather than siege. They did not carry heavy equipment, which meant they could not breach a properly reinforced palisade if the gate held. They would probe for weakness before committing to attack. If they found none, Ironbane was pragmatic enough to bypass a hard target in favor of softer prey elsewhere. The critical thing was to make Crossmark look like more trouble than it was worth from the moment they arrived. We do not have the numbers to hold them in a pitched fight, she said. But we do not need to. We need to look like we do. Fire every lantern on the palisade. Post guards on visible rotations with as much variety as possible to make the force look larger. Fill the gate structure with height barrels, crates, anything that gives silhouettes on the wall when lit from behind. And you need to reinforce the gate crossbar. Ironbane will send a small group to test it before he commits the main force. If the gate holds, he will hesitate. Commander Price was leaning over his maps. He was not looking at her with the guarded distrust he'd worn when she walked in. He was looking at her with the expression of a professional who has just heard something tactically sound. Shelby, he said without looking up, why didn't you bring her here on the first day? I was a bit occupied, Simon said. In the end, the garrison adopted most of Vola's suggestions. Fenn objected to all of them and was overruled on all of them, which Simon found satisfying in a way that he knew was petty and didn't particularly care about. Vola stayed through the full council, answering questions with the same even precision, and when it was over and they walked back through the dark market toward the anvil and ale, Simon noticed that she was walking slightly closer to him than she had before. "They listened," she said. There was something quiet and almost surprised in her voice. "You gave them something worth listening to. Most humans do not." She paused. "Listen to orcs, I mean, not in a setting like that. Most humans in this town have never had an Iron Fang warband coming down the pass road before," Simon said. "It concentrates the mind." She made a sound that was not quite a laugh but was in the neighborhood of one. It was low and brief and genuine, and Simon catalogued it as something he would like to hear again. The next 2 days were a controlled storm of preparation. Simon did his part. He opened the anvil and ale as a supply depot and staging ground, which meant his common room was full of people all hours of the day, barrels being moved, rope being measured, every flat surface covered in maps and lists, and the particular organized chaos of people who are frightened and channeling it into work. He cooked constantly. He kept the water kegs full. He organized the non-combatants' evacuation route to the garrison's secondary building, which was stone-walled and had a proper cellar, and he went over it twice with the people most likely to need it until he was sure they knew the way. Vola worked beside him through most of it. She moved crates that it would have taken 3 men to manage, and she did it with the focused, economical efficiency that seemed to be her natural mode of operation. She reinforced the gate crossbar personally. Simon watched her work the iron strapping with tools from her own kit, her large hands precise and certain, her face still with concentration, and she was magnificent at it in the way that someone is magnificent when they are doing exactly the thing they are built for. On the evening before the Iron Fang was expected, when the palisade lanterns were lit and the guards were walking their visible rotations, and there was nothing left to do but wait, Simon brought 2 bowls of soup to the palisade wall where Vola was standing watch and held one up toward her. She looked down at him. She was on the walkway, which put her head a good 12 feet above the ground, and she crouched down easily to take the bowl, and Simon stood below and they ate in companionable silence while the market town settled into uneasy quiet around them. "If they come through," Simon said, "and things go badly." "Things will not go badly," she said. "But if they do." She looked at him. The lantern light on the palisade caught the angles of her face, the line of her jaw, the curve of her tusks, the dark depth of her eyes. "I will not let them take the gate," she said. It was not a brag. It was a statement of intention as certain as the gate crossbar she had strapped with iron that afternoon. "That is not actually what I was going to say," Simon said. "What were you going to say?" He thought about it. He was not sure what he had been going to say. Something about the fact that in 4 days he had come to feel more attached to the life of one specific orc woman than seemed entirely reasonable, and that if the Iron Fang came through the gate he would not be able to adequately express his feelings about her being in harm's way because he had not yet fully figured out what those feelings were. "I was going to say that you should know where the cellar key is," he said instead, "in case you need shelter." She looked at him for a moment longer than strictly necessary. Then she turned back to the dark beyond the palisade. "Tell me where the key is," she said. "Left side of the bar under the 3rd board from the wall, loose board." "I'll show you." "Show me tomorrow," she said. "After." "After," he agreed, and the word felt like a promise. The Iron Fang came at dawn. They came out of the tree line on the north road in a column that made the horizon look dark and moving, and every lantern on the palisade blazed up at once as the garrison bell rang and Crossmark snapped from anxious sleep into terrified readiness. Simon was on the palisade walkway within 2 minutes, standing beside Vola, and he could see the column halting a 1/4 mile out, exactly where Vola had predicted, while scouts fanned forward to assess. She stood on the walkway with her bow in her hand and an arrow nocked but undrawn, and she was watching the scouts with the flat professional attention of a woman who has done this before. Simon stood beside her. He had a crossbow from the garrison armory, and he knew how to use it, having grown up in a border town, and he was aware that if it came to a serious engagement, He was going to be considerably less useful than the woman beside him. But he was here, and he was not leaving. The scouts reached the palisade line and withdrew. For 20 minutes nothing happened. The sun came up. The market was absolutely silent. The Iron Fang column sat at the tree line and did not move. Then a single rider came forward, not a scout, a messenger. He stopped 50 yards from the gate and called out in his own language. Simon did not understand it. Vola did. She was quiet for a moment after the man finished speaking, and Simon watched something complicated move across her face. Then she called back in Iron Fang dialect a short, commanding statement, her voice carrying over the wall with absolute authority. The rider went back. "What did he say?" Simon asked. "He said they want passage through the market, food and supply purchase, not a raid." Simon blinked. "Then what was all the—" "It was a show of force," she said, "to negotiate from strength. Ironbane is not an idiot. He knows Crossmark has been reinforced and that raiding a fortified position wastes people he cannot replace. He would rather buy what he needs." "And what did you say back?" She looked at him with that straight, level gaze. "I told him the Keth clan's ironsmith stands with the garrison of Crossmark, and that any Iron Fang who enters the market comes in peace with weapons slung or does not enter at all. I told him the gate will hold against anything he can bring." She paused. "And I told him that if Drath Ironbane wants to explain to the northern clans how he lost the pass road over a failed raid on a crossroads market, I would be happy to carry that story back myself." Simon stared at her. "You threatened their war chief." "I reminded him of practical considerations," she said, with the dry precision she used when she was almost but not quite smiling. "The Iron Fang column withdrew before midday. Not routed, not defeated, they turned back up the pass road in good order, with the particular contained dignity of a force that has chosen not to expend itself unnecessarily." Commander Price watched them go from the palisade wall, and then turned and looked at Vola with an expression that Simon had never seen on the man's face before. It was something close to respect. Aldrich Fenn said that the Iron Fang had simply decided to move on, and that the preparedness had done its work, and that he was not sure the orc had had anything to do with it one way or the other. No one agreed with him out loud, but several people nodded in the way people nod when they are grateful for a socially convenient explanation. That night, Crossmark opened every lantern in the market square, and someone produced a cask of decent ale and a fiddle. And there was a celebration that was partly relief and partly the electric release of people who had spent 3 days genuinely afraid and were now alive. Simon sat on the porch of the Anvil and Ale and watched it, and after a while Vola came and sat beside him on the bench there, and the bench creaked alarmingly but held. "You could have left," he said, "any time in the last 3 days. You had your horse and your goods and a clear road south. You stayed." She was quiet for a moment. In the square, the fiddle was playing and someone was dancing badly and everyone was clapping anyway. "My cousin's iron paid for this trip," she said. "He deserved to have it count for something." "That's one reason," Simon said. She looked at him sideways. He looked back at her. "What was the other one?" The silence between them was not uncomfortable. It had the quality of a silence that is waiting for someone to be honest, and both of them could feel it. The fiddle played. A child who should have been in bed ran past the porch laughing, chased by a tired parent. The lanterns made everything warm. "You unchained me," she said finally, quietly. Not the way she had said it before, which had been practical and matter-of-fact. This time it was something else. "No one has ever done that, not like that, not in front of a crowd with nothing to gain." She was looking out at the celebration, not at him. "I have been through this market 3 times in the last 4 years. Every time I have paid my bond in advance and kept my head down and left as fast as I could with as little trouble as possible. And this time, a man I had never met walked into a mob and spent his own coin and stood in front of 30 hostile people and took the chains off." She paused. "I noticed." Simon was quiet. "I noticed things," she said, still not looking at him. "It is a habit. It has kept me alive. And I noticed every choice you made in the last 3 days, Simon Shelby." The room with the long bed, the refilled bowl, bringing me to the council, standing on the palisade, not telling me to stay inside where it was safe. She paused again. You see me as a person. Of course I do, he said, and he meant it with no distance between himself and the words. She turned and looked at him then, and she was close on the bench, in the lantern light, with the fiddle playing and the world temporarily reduced to this porch in this moment. And she was enormous and extraordinarily beautiful, and looking at him with an expression that was direct and unguarded in the way that directness is when a person has been guarded for a long time and is choosing, deliberately, to stop. I also notice, she said in a slightly different voice, that you have been looking at me. Simon did not attempt to deny this. You are extremely difficult not to look at. She studied him with those dark eyes. This close, he could see the faint green-gold flecks in them, which he had not noticed before, and the way the lantern light caught the line of her cheekbone above that diagonal scar. Most men find me frightening, she said. Most men are less intelligent than they think they are, Simon said. Something moved in her expression, something warm and uncertain and real. She leaned toward him slightly, the massive, solid weight of her shifting on the bench, and Simon had the sudden vivid impression of a glacier deciding to move. He did not move back. He looked up at her. She was taller than him even sitting down, and she was very close now, and he could feel the warmth radiating off her, and she smelled of iron and wood smoke, and something that was just her, particular and specific and entirely her own. Vola, he said quietly. She had to lean down to hear him, the bench being what it was and the noise of the celebration being what it was, and she leaned down, her head tilting, her ear toward his mouth, and he said, quietly, honestly, without the performance of bravery because it didn't feel like bravery at all, I think you are the most remarkable person I have ever met, and I would very much like it if you stayed. She was perfectly still for a moment. Then she turned her head so that they were face to face at close range, which meant she was looking slightly down at him, and he could see every detail of her face, the scar and the tusks and the green-gold eyes and the strong jaw that had given her her name. How long? She said, very quietly. As long as you want, he said. She kissed him. It was decisive and unhurried and warm, and she cupped his face in one large hand with a gentleness that was extraordinary given the strength behind it. And he kissed her back, and she made a sound very low in her throat that was entirely without reserve, and the fiddle played on in the market square and the lanterns burned. When she pulled back, she looked at him with an expression he had never seen on her face before. It was not guarded or assessing or professionally calm. It was simply open. He thought she looked young suddenly, not younger than she was, which he estimated at 28 or 29, but young in the way of someone who has let something down that they have been carrying for a very long time. I have been on the road since my cousin died, she said. I have not had anywhere to be specifically, just the next market, the next trade, the next road. Stay here, he said again, through the season at least. You have my chimney to maintain. She looked at the roof. Your chimney will be fine for 3 winters, she said. There will be other things, he said. There's always other things. She looked back at him. She was almost smiling, which on her face was a tremendous and very specific event. You are negotiating, she said. I'm an innkeeper, he said. It's what I do. She leaned back on the bench, which announced its feelings about this with a long creak, and she settled her shoulder against his, which put the top of his head approximately at her chin level, and she was warm and solid and very present. And Simon Shelby sat on the porch of the Anvil and Ale at the crossroads of the border market with his shoulder pressed to the arm of an orc woman who had walked into his market 5 days ago, and he was beginning to understand. Rearranged something fundamental about what he thought his life was going to look like. He did not find this concerning. He found it, quite surprisingly, like relief. The remaining days of the market cycle had a different quality after that. Vola finished her trading, her iron goods sold completely by the 7th day, which she noted with a satisfaction that was the most openly pleased Simon had seen her over a business matter, and then she did not pack up and leave. She did not make announcements about it or discuss it in procedural terms. She simply remained, and rearranged her presence in the anvil and ale from that of a paying guest to that of a person who lived there and was contributing. And the rearrangement was gradual enough that Simon could have pointed to any specific day and said she was still just a guest, except that by the 15th day she was cooking breakfast at 5 in the morning before he got up because she woke early and the kitchen was there, and she knew how to use it. And her gray horse was in his stable, and her weapons were hanging on the wall of the room next to the storage room. And when Simon came downstairs in the early dark, he could see the light under her door and feel the heat of the kitchen and smell something with spices he didn't have names for, and this was quite simply the best morning routine of his adult life. They were careful with each other in the early days. Not cold, nothing between them was cold, but attentive. She asked before she changed anything in the kitchen. He asked before he moved any of her things. They had a conversation about the gray horse and his stable habits that was ostensibly about the horse, but was actually about the fact that they were both figuring out how to share space with a person they were already half in love with and trying not to break it by moving too fast. The horse was called Brack. He was difficult. Vola was the only person he did not actively threaten, and she managed him with the same patient authority she brought to most things. The next market cycle brought new traders, new travelers, new tension. Aldrich Fenn had not given up. Simon had expected this and had prepared for it by spending the intercycle week being scrupulously correct about every legal detail of his operation, his bond sponsorship of Vola included, and by having several long conversations with Captain Marsh that resulted in a standing arrangement by which Marsh's senior deputy would respond to any formal complaint from Fenn within 1 hour rather than the usual 2 days. Fenn tried 3 times in the second cycle to have Vola's bond reviewed for technicalities. All 3 reviews found the documentation perfectly in order. The third review found, incidentally, several irregularities in Fenn's own recovered goods ledgers, which Captain Marsh noted for follow-up investigation, and after that Fenn stopped trying the official channels. He tried the unofficial ones instead, which was worse in some ways and better in others. 3 times in the second cycle someone threw a rock at Vola's stall while she wasn't there. Once someone cut the ropes on her awning overnight. She repaired everything and said nothing, but Simon watched her jaw set a little tighter each time, and he burned with a steady low fury about it that he was not sure what to do with. What he did was talk to people. Simon Shelby was not a large man, and he was not a frightening man, and he was not a man with any official authority over anything. What he was, after 6 years at the crossroads, was someone that everyone came through eventually. Every merchant who wanted a meal and a dry bed. Every guard who wanted a drink after a long shift. Every trader from both sides of the border who needed a room on market night. He was the person who had been there every time and who remembered people and who kept accounts that showed clearly who owed what to whom, and who was trusted by essentially everyone in the market because he had never given anyone cause not to be. This was a different kind of power from Fenn's money, and it moved more slowly. But when Simon began speaking quietly to the people he trusted, the rock stopped. The rope cutting stopped. Vola noticed. She did not say anything about it directly, but one evening she looked at him across the common room, and there was something in her expression that was warm and fierce at once, and she came over to where he was behind the bar and stood close to him, very close, and looked at him with that direct, unguarded regard that he was beginning to treasure the way you treasure something you know is rare. "You talk to people," she said. "I mentioned some things." "What did you mention?" "That I have long memories and complete ledgers," he said, "and that the climate of welcome in this market is directly connected to the trade volume it can attract. And that trade volume is how everyone in this market makes their living, including the people who have been making life difficult for my sponsored trader." She was quiet for a moment. "Your sponsored trader," she repeated. "You," he said, as noted in the official bond ledger. I know who I am. She was looking at him with that expression again. Simon. Yes. Come here. She was already right there. He stepped around the bar to where she stood, and she was a foot taller, and she reached up and touched the side of his face with one green hand, her fingers cool from the evening air and her touch precise and intentional, and she said, "You are always doing something for me before I know I need it." "I notice things too," he said. She kissed him again, there in the common room in the evening light with the bar between them a moment ago and now nothing between them. And this kiss was longer than the one on the porch and considerably less restrained. And she made that low sound again, and he had his hands on her waist, which was like spanning his hands around something immovable and warm. And when she finally stepped back, she was breathing slightly differently and looking at him with very dark eyes. "There are no guests in the East Room tonight," she said. He looked at her. He thought about 11 silver coins and a crowd and a chain and the particular arithmetic of choosing a person. "There aren't," he confirmed. "Then I'm not going to the storage room," she said, with the quiet directness of a woman who means exactly what she says and always has. He met her eyes. "I know," he said. "What happened that night was not a transaction or a convenience or a mistake. It was two people who had been alone for a long time and had found, improbably, each other, and who met in warmth and honesty and the particular careful tenderness of people who understand they are handling something they do not want to break." She was powerful and specific and real in his arms, and the way she looked at him, choosing him, wanting him, with that directness that never wavered, was something he would carry for the rest of his life as one of the truest things he had ever experienced. He held her in the dark of the East Room with the summer night beyond the window, and thought that he had not known his life was empty until she filled it. The market cycle turned. A new one began. The summer deepened and then began to tip toward autumn, and the gray horse grew a heavier coat, and Brack's bad temper took on an additional seasonal dimension that everyone in the stable gave him room for. Vola sent a dispatch rider north to the Keth clan with the proceeds of her trading, sealed with the clan mark that identified it as legitimate business. She received, 2 weeks later, a response. She read it privately and then came to find Simon, who was in the cellar doing inventory, and crouched in the cellar doorway to tell him that the Keth clan trade master wanted to know when she was coming home. Simon set down his counting board. "What did you tell him?" She looked at the cellar. She looked at Simon. "Nothing yet," she said. "What do you want to tell him?" She was quiet for a long time. Then she said, "The Keth clan is my family. I have obligations there. My cousin was my closest kin and he is gone, but there are others who depend on the trade routes I manage." She was choosing her words carefully, which she always did, but more so now. "I cannot simply disappear from those obligations." "I know," he said. He was not going to ask her to. "And Crossmark is not," she stopped. "Crossmark has not historically been a welcoming place for an orc woman to make her life." "I know that too." He looked at her steadily. "But it's more welcoming than it was 3 months ago, and I think it keeps getting more welcoming the longer you stay." She looked at him. "You think I am changing this town?" "I think we both are." He paused. "You don't have to choose between the Keth clan and here. You could run the trade route and come back between cycles. It doesn't have to be one or the other." She was very still for a moment. "You would wait for me." "For as long as you needed," he said. It came out easily, the way the truth often does when you've stopped being afraid of it. She crossed the cellar in 2 strides and kissed him in the cellar doorway amid the smell of stored barley and autumn apples, her hands on his face. And the inventory absolutely did not get finished that afternoon. She wrote back to the Keth clan trade master. She told him she was maintaining the Crossmark route and would be in contact with supply needs before the winter close. She did not tell him about Simon yet. Simon understood this and did not press it. There were things that needed to be right before they were announced, and he was content to let them get there in their own time. The trouble with Fenn did not end. It transformed. Fenn, stymied on the official and the social fronts, tried money next. He did not try to bribe Simon. He was smart enough to know that would not work. But he did approach 3 separate market council members about rezoning the market stalls in a way that would push the Orc Traders area outside the palisade walls. Simon found out about this on a Tuesday from Hardin, who had been approached and had declined and come directly to Simon, because Hardin was a man who understood that his business interests and Vola's continued presence were not unrelated. Simon went to Captain Marsh. Marsh went to the Market Council with documentation showing that the proposed rezoning violated the Border Treaty on Market Access, which was a treaty signed by the Crown's representative and therefore not subject to Market Council jurisdiction. The rezoning proposal died. Fenn then put it out through the merchant gossip network that Vola Steeljaw was an Iron Fang sympathizer who had negotiated a private deal with Drath Ironbane during the standoff, which was why the clan had withdrawn. She had sold out Crossmark's defensive positioning in exchange for safe passage for herself. This was so completely false that Simon actually laughed when he heard it, which Hardin found disconcerting. Then Simon stopped laughing, because he knew from experience that a lie doesn't need to be credible to be damaging. It only needs to move fast enough and lodge in enough minds before the truth catches up. He sat down at his bar that evening and wrote out, carefully, a full account of the standoff including every witness he could name, and every decision Vola had made, and every statement she had made to the Iron Fang messenger, all of which was verifiable by the border guards who had been on the palisade. He got Commander Price to sign it. He got Captain Marsh to countersign. He had 20 copies made by the town scribe and posted them in every common space in the market, including, pointedly, on the beam directly above the entrance to Fenn's recovered goods stall. Fenn tore the copies down. Someone else posted them again. This happened twice. Fenn gave up. Vola read the posted account and looked at Simon and said, "You have written that I threatened the Iron Fang war chief with clan gossip. It's accurate. It also makes me sound terrifying." "You were terrifying," Simon said. "From the palisade, watching you do that, it was the single most impressive thing I have ever seen." She looked at him with that expression he had learned to recognize as her version of being moved by something. It was subtle, a slight softening around the eyes, a slight easing of the jaw, and in anyone else it might have been invisible, but he had been looking at her face for 3 months and he knew every gradation of it. She crossed the common room and sat on the bar stool in front of him and looked at him directly. "You champion me," she said, "every time without being asked." "You deserve it," he said. "Many people deserve things they do not receive." She looked at him steadily. "Why does it matter to you this much, truly?" It was a serious question and she was asking it seriously, and Simon thought about it seriously, with his hands flat on the bar and the autumn light coming through the windows and the sound of the market winding down outside. "Because the first time I saw you, you were chained in the open market, and you were looking at a mob the same way you probably look at a structural problem, assessing it, planning for it, not afraid of it," he said. "And something about that, something about the fact that you were magnificent and they were trying to make you small, was the most unjust thing I had ever seen in my life. And I have thought about it every day since, and I think the reason it matters to me is that you should not have to be made small, not by chains and not by rumor and not by any of it. You are too." He stopped. He started again. "You are too you." She was looking at him with wide, dark eyes. "That may not be the clearest statement I have ever made," he said. "It was perfectly clear," she said. She reached across the bar and took his hand in hers, her large green fingers around his scarred brown ones, and held it with a gentleness that was always extraordinary given what her hands could do. "I want you to know something," she said. "In Keth clan custom, when a warrior finds the person they intend to keep, they give them a mark. Not a wound, a mark willingly shared, the mark of the clan, given as witness that this person is mine and I am theirs." She paused. "I have not done this. I am telling you it exists because I want you to know what I would do if we were in my clan's territory and not a human crossroads market." Simon was very still. "What does the mark look like?" "It is a small thing. A series of clan symbols pressed into the wrist with a heated iron ring, not painful in the lasting sense." She was watching his face carefully. "I am not asking you to do this. I am telling you that when I look at you, I think of it." He looked at their joined hands. He thought about what it meant, the specific, extraordinary weight of being the person that Vola Steeljaw thought of when she thought of permanence. He thought about the empty life he'd been living for 6 years in this inn, adequate and survivable and quietly, comprehensively lonely. He thought about waking up to the smell of her unfamiliar spices from the kitchen at 5 in the morning and how that had become, in 3 months, the thing his mornings were organized around. "Tell me what the symbols mean," he said. She told him. Each one had a meaning: protection, partnership, chosen. She traced them on his wrist with her fingertip, one by one, her touch light and specific. He watched her do it. "If you were to do this," he said, "in your clan's custom, who would witness it?" She looked up at him. "Any 2 people the warrior trusts." He was quiet for a moment, then he said, "I know 2 people who would do it if you wanted." She looked at him for a long moment. "You are saying yes," she said. It was almost a question. "I am saying yes," he confirmed. She kissed him over the bar, leaning across it, both hands on his face, and the amber lantern light made everything warm and specific around them, and the common room of the Anvil and Ale at the crossroads of the border market held this moment with the quiet solemnity of old timber and river stone. They did it 2 days later in the early morning, with Captain Marsh and Hardin as witnesses. Vola had the iron ring in her kit. She had carried it, she told Simon simply, for 10 years, waiting for someone she wanted to use it for. It was small and marked with Keth clan symbols, and it took only a moment, and Simon had expected it to hurt more than it did, and afterward he looked at the small marks on the inside of his left wrist and felt something settle in him that he had not realized was unsettled. Vola had the matching marks already clan-born, she explained, given when a warrior reaches full standing, with the rest left open for a partner to complete. She traced his marks with one finger and then looked at him with something in her face that was the most open he had ever seen her. "The Keth clan names this binding as real as any ceremony," she said. "Where I go, you have claim. Where you are, I have right to stand." "That goes both ways," Simon said. "Yes," she agreed, "both ways." Hardin shook Simon's hand and seemed genuinely pleased and also somewhat overwhelmed by the occasion. Captain Marsh looked at Vola's marks and then at Simon's and said, with her particular brand of dry practicality, "Well, the bond paperwork in the garrison ledger is going to need an amendment." Then she smiled, which was rare enough to be remarkable. "Congratulations to you both." Aldrich Fenn learned about it by the end of the day, because things in the border market always traveled by end of day. He learned about it, and he said things about it in the Merchant's Rest Tavern that were ugly and specific, and which 3 different people reported back to Simon the following morning. Simon listened, and said nothing immediate, because his first instinct was not his best one in that moment. His first instinct was to go to Fenn's stall and say something that would satisfy him enormously in the short term and cause considerable problems in the long term. His second instinct was to let Vola deal with it. His third instinct, the one he acted on, was to go back to work. He made soup. He restocked the cellar. He fixed the east room shutter that had been sticking since early autumn. He did his work and he waited. And by the end of the second day, after Fenn's comments, he had received, through the official Market Council notice board, a formal complaint lodged by Aldrich Fenn against the bond sponsorship of Vola Steeljaw, citing a newly interpreted clause in the border market charter about the eligibility of bonded partners to hold trader status. Simon took the complaint to Captain Marsh. Marsh took it to the garrison legal officer, whose name was Lieutenant Casel, and who had the weary-eyed expression of someone who had been interpreting border market charter clauses for a very long time. Casel read the complaint and then read the charter and then read the complaint again and looked up and said, "This clause doesn't say what Fenn thinks it says. It is about commercial partnerships, not personal bonds. His complaint has no standing." Marsh nodded. The complaint was dismissed with a formal notation. Fenn, told of the dismissal, said something else in the merchant's rest that evening. A different 3 people reported it to Simon the next morning. Simon was in the kitchen when they told him. He kept his hands moving, cutting vegetables for the midday service, and he listened and thanked them. And when they left, he stood at the kitchen table for a while doing nothing in particular. Vola came in from the stable where she had been checking Brack's winter shoe fitting. She looked at him. She could always tell. It was one of the things about her that he found continuously extraordinary, the way she read him, having once applied her considerable intelligence to learning the language of his face and posture, with the same thoroughness she applied to everything. "What did Fenn say now?" she said, flatly. "It was personal," Simon said. "About you and me, and it was ugly." She was quiet for a moment. "Tell me," he told her. He kept his voice even while he did it. When he finished, she was silent for long enough that he looked up from the vegetables. She was standing at the kitchen door with her jaw set and her expression still in the specific way of a professional considering options. "I should have let you hit him on the second day," Simon said. "I did not want to hit him on the second day," she said. "I wanted to hit him on the first day, and I still do not think it would help." She looked at Simon. "What do you want to do about him?" "In the long term, nothing violent." "Yes, I know that," she said without impatience. "In the long term, Simon." "What do you want?" He thought about it. He put down his knife and thought about it seriously, which she always expected of him and which he had come to understand was one of the forms of respect she showed, asking for his actual thoughts rather than his deflection. "I want him to stop," he said. "I want there to be a crossmark that does not have Aldrich Fenn poisoning the ground. And I want he stopped." "Tell me," she said. "I want to know that you will still want to be here next spring," he said. "That this is worth it. That I am not making your life harder by asking you to stay in a place where someone like Fenn exists." She crossed the kitchen. She stopped directly in front of him. She was in her travel leathers as always, her braid over one shoulder, her hands hanging at her sides, and she looked at him with the directness that was her natural state. "Look at my wrist," she said. He looked. "The marks." "That is my answer," she said. "And Fenn is one man with gold rings and too many opinions. He is not the whole of this town. He is not the whole of what I weigh when I think about staying." She reached out and took his hand, the marked wrist in her marked hand. "You are what I weigh. And the soup, and the terrible horse, and the chimney I fixed, and the porch where you kissed me back." She paused. "You specifically are enough." He looked at her. He was aware of the specific weight of being chosen by someone for whom choosing was not a casual act, and it did not feel light. It felt like the only solid thing he had stood on in years. "I love you," he said. The first time he had said it in those precise words, something moved in her face. The slight easing around the eyes, the jaw, but more than that, something deeper and younger and more essential. "In Keth," she said, "we say it differently. We say, 'You are my direction.'" She paused. "It means the same thing. You are my direction," he said. She kissed him, and the kitchen was warm. And outside, the autumn market was continuing its business, and Brack was somewhere in the stable being unpleasant, and none of it mattered at all. The situation with Fenn came to its necessary conclusion 3 weeks later, not through any dramatic intervention on Simon's part, but through the accumulated weight of Fenn's own behavior catching up with him. The investigation into the irregularities in his recovered goods ledger, which Captain Marsh had noted 4 months earlier, and which her office had been quietly pursuing since, produced enough documented evidence of systematic theft from Orc clan traders over a 7-year period to constitute a serious legal matter. The Crown's trade investigator arrived from the regional capital on a gray October morning, and by noon Aldrich Fenn was in the garrison holding room, and his recovered goods stall was locked and sealed. Simon heard about it while serving the midday meal. He served the meal. Then he sat down at an empty table in the corner of the common room and was very still for a while, feeling the particular sensation of a long-held tension releasing. And Vola came in from the market and saw his face and sat down across from him without asking what had happened, waiting. "Fenn's been arrested," he said. She looked at him steadily. "For the irregularities." "Yes." He looked at his hands. 7 years of it. He was stealing from Orc clan traders systematically, taking goods from their packs before they got to the market, marking them as recovered, selling them at full price, doing it to enough people with enough frequency that it became a significant operation. He paused. He did it to you, probably. Your first cycle, maybe earlier. Vola was quiet. Yes, she said finally. I thought some goods were missing from my first cycle's pack. I assumed I had miscounted in transit. She was still 7 years. Yes, other traders, not just me. No, many. He looked at her. I'm sorry I didn't catch it sooner. You caught it when you could, she said. And it was Captain Marsh's office that investigated, not yours. She looked at him evenly. You did not need to fix this personally. You have fixed enough things. I didn't fix this one. You unchained me, she said, for the 3rd time in their history, and this time it encompassed everything else. The bond paper and the legal challenge and the posted notices and the counsel and the marks on their wrists. And she said it like a statement that closes an argument, final and without need of amendment. The Regional Crown's investigator, a woman named Assessor Lind, spent 2 weeks in Crossmark reviewing Fenn's records. She interviewed Simon, Captain Marsh, Vola, and a significant portion of the market membership. Her final report recommended restitution to affected traders from Fenn's seized assets, which would not cover everything, but would cover more than any of them had expected. Vola's estimated losses over 4 market cycles were included in the restitution schedule, which was a number that made Simon wince on her behalf when he saw it in writing. Fenn was taken to the regional capital to face charges. Simon watched the transport wagon leave through the Thornwall gate on a cold October morning and stood on the porch of the Anvil and Ale until it was out of sight, and then went inside and made tea, and Vola was at the bar with her hands around a mug, and she looked at him when he came in and said, without ceremony, "Now what?" "Now the market keeps going," Simon said. "And so do we." She nodded. Outside, the market was already open, the stalls doing their autumn trade in the last cycle before the winter close, and life had the particular quality of a thing that continues in spite of everything. The winter close came on a Sunday, as it always did. The last traders packed their stalls and the last buyers took their purchases home, and the market square went quiet under the first light frost of the year. Simon closed the Anvil and Ale to the public for the 3-week winter settlement period, which was when he did his accounts and restocked and made repairs to anything that had been neglected during the trading season. Vola had a decision to make. She had sent her second dispatch to the Keth clan trade master after Fenn's arrest, updating the iron goods accounting and the restitution schedule. The response had come back with a new element. The Keth clan was proposing to expand the Crossmark route for the coming year, which would mean more goods, more cycles, and would require a permanent trade representative at the Crossmark end rather than a seasonal one. The trade master, whose name was Gorak and who was Vola's mother's brother, had written, in the typically understated Keth way, that if Vola was going to be in Crossmark through the winter anyway, she might as well consider the position. She showed Simon the letter over dinner on the day it arrived. He read it. He read it again. Then he put it down and looked at her carefully, because the thing about being with Vola Steeljaw was that you had to look at her carefully to know where she actually was, since her face and her internal state did not always match their outside temperature. She was carefully controlled, which meant she cared very much. "What do you want to do?" he said. "I want to stay," she said. "I have wanted to stay since October. I have been looking for reasons not to, and I have mostly run out of them." What were the reasons? That I was being impractical, that a border market crossroads was not a permanent situation for an Orc woman alone, that Fenn would make it impossible. She paused. "Fenn is gone. The market is stable, and I am not alone." He looked at her across the table. The winter light was coming through the window, pale and specific, and the inn was quiet around them with the particular quiet of a place between seasons. "Take the position," he said. "It would be a permanent arrangement. I would be here through cycles and settlement and winter and everything." "I know," he said. "Your inn would have an Orc woman in it indefinitely," she said. The market would have to adjust to that being permanent rather than seasonal. The market adjusted faster than anyone expected once someone stopped actively working against it, he said, and it will keep adjusting. She looked at him with those dark eyes. You are certain. I have never been more certain of anything in my life. She held his gaze for a long moment. Then she said, I am going to write back to Gorak. Good, he said. And then I am going to fix the east room shutter properly because you fixed it badly in October and it is going to let cold air in all winter. I thought I did it well, Simon said. You did it adequately, she said, with the measured precision that was her version of teasing, and he laughed. And she watched him laugh with that expression that was warm and fierce at once, and she reached across the table and closed her hand around his marked wrist and held it. She wrote to Gorak. She fixed the shutter. She spent the winter settlement period doing what she did, which was working with focused efficiency and fixing things, and making things with an attention and a craft that Simon found beautiful to watch. She made a new shelf for the bar from a piece of oak she found in the woodpile, fitting it precisely without measuring instruments because she had measured it once with her eye and kept the numbers. She made a new awning support for her market stall, oiled and fitted against the spring rain. She cooked things that Simon had never eaten, with spices from her pack, and he ate everything she made and never pretended it was bad when it wasn't, and sometimes it wasn't, and she received his honest assessments with the same equanimity she received everything, filing them away for adjustment. In return, he showed her everything about the anvil and ale that she didn't already know from having lived in it for 4 months. The account system, which was intricate and his own invention. The cellar arrangement, which he had refined over 6 years. The particular way the east-facing rooms caught the morning light that came off the market square. She absorbed it all. She had a mind for systems and she saw his clearly. And one evening she sat down with his account ledger and reorganized the revenue tracking in a way that saved him an hour of work per week. And when he looked at what she'd done, he saw that she understood in the way you understand something you think of as yours, not as a guest understands a place but as a keeper does. You know this place, he said. I have been paying attention, she said. To the accounts, she looked up from the ledger. To everything, she said simply. He sat down beside her at the bar table. Outside, the winter market square was empty and gray and frost was on the palisade posts, and the lanterns were long unlit. And inside the anvil and ale it was warm and specific and real. He leaned against her shoulder, which meant he was leaning against something approximately as solid as the inn's river-stone chimney, and she leaned back slightly, that deliberate shift, the glacier choosing to move, and they sat there in the quiet of the winter settlement, and the accounting book was open between them, and it was, Simon thought, the best thing he had ever had. She sent a formal acceptance of the Keth clan trade representative position on the first day of spring. The spring market cycle opened on a clear March morning with 5 Orc clan traders coming through Thornwall Gate, which was the largest number in 3 years, and their arrival produced exactly the kind of open market adjustment that Simon had predicted. It was awkward for the first day and businesslike by the third and brisk by the 5th. Vola had organized the iron goods display herself and was managing the stall with her characteristic focused calm, and 2 new human buyers had come specifically for the Keth iron after hearing about the quality from traders who had visited the previous autumn. She sold out her first 2 crates before midday on day 3. Simon watched from across the market square, leaning in his inn's doorway, and he felt something that he thought was probably pride and definitely was more than that. The specific warmth of watching someone you love do the thing they are completely built for, in the place where they belong. She looked up from across the square and found him without searching, which she always did with that precise directness, and she held his eyes for a moment. Just a moment. Then she turned back to her buyer and continued her transaction. He went back inside. There was soup to make. Life at the crossroads had the particular texture of things that matter most repetitive on the surface and completely different underneath. Every market cycle brought new people and new complications, and new moments that were good or hard or sometimes both. The second spring cycle brought a delegation from the Iron Fang clan seeking legitimate trade access, which caused considerable anxiety in the garrison, and which Vola handled by meeting personally with the Iron Fang trade emissary, a woman named Hera who was Drath Ironbane's younger sister, and who, it turned out, had been advocating for trade over raiding for 3 years, and the two of them negotiated a preliminary access agreement that Captain Marsh then reviewed and passed to the garrison commander, who sent it to the regional capital with a recommendation of approval. It was approved 6 weeks later. The Iron Fang began trading in the next cycle. It was not simple, and it was not without incident, but it was real. Hardin said at a council meeting that he had not believed an orc trade representative would stabilize the market, and he now owed Simon Shelby approximately 2 years of being wrong about various things, which he intended to pay off in installments. Simon said he would take it in ale. The third spring cycle brought Gorak. Vola's uncle was a large man even by Keth standards, with a gray-streaked braid and the bearing of someone who has led caravans through mountain passes for 30 years. He arrived at the Thornwall Gate with his own trading party, and with the particular watchfulness of a man who has come to see something specific and intends to form his own opinion of it. He came to the Anvil and Ale on the first evening of the cycle and sat at the bar and looked at Simon with the careful attention of someone who is deciding how much trust to extend. Vola introduced them. She stood between them in the common room and said, "Gorak, this is Simon Shelby. He is the keeper of this inn and my partner under Keth binding." She said it exactly that directly, with no softening or qualification. Gorak looked at Simon's wrist. He looked at Vola's. He looked at Simon's face. He looked at the common room, the good shelves, the clean bar, the amber lanterns, the particular feel of a well-kept place. He looked at Vola again. Then he said something in Keth dialect that was short and apparently final. Vola translated without changing expression. "He says you have an honest face for a human innkeeper." "Is that a compliment?" Simon said. "From Gorak, yes," she said. "It is essentially a very high honor." Simon offered Gorak a room and a meal. Gorak took both. By the end of the first evening, they were doing accounts together over the bar, because Gorak was also a man with a mind for systems, and he and Simon had independently arrived at similar accounting methods through completely different routes, which Gorak found interesting enough to discuss at length. Vola sat at the end of the bar and watched the two men argue amiably about revenue tracking, and looked as close to at ease as Simon had ever seen her. When Gorak left on the 5th day of the cycle, he stopped Simon on the inn's porch and said, in common speech that was accented but clear, "She has been better since she came here, since she found you. She was lost after Oruk and she did not say it, but I saw it." He paused. "I see it is not so now." He looked at Simon directly. "The Keth clan acknowledges the binding. You are kin by our custom." Simon was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "Thank you for her, for letting her take the route." Gorak made a sound that was approximately Keth for the irony of this statement. "We are not in the habit of stopping Vola from doing what she intends to do," he said. "I sent the letter. She would have stayed regardless." He went back to his horse and rode out through the Thornwall Gate with his trading party behind him. Simon stood on the porch for a while after they left, with the afternoon light on the market square and the sound of Brack being unpleasant somewhere in the stable, and he thought about intended things. The things that happened because they were always going to, pulling toward each other across a distance, needing only the right moment. The summer of the second year was the most alive Simon had ever felt. It was busy and sometimes difficult and full of complications, because the border market at Crossmark was an inherently complicated place, and they were two complicated people trying to make something real in the middle of all of it. The Iron Fang trade agreement hit a rough patch in its 4th cycle, when a dispute over goods assessment nearly became a brawl in the market square, and Vola and Captain Marsh spent a very long and very tense afternoon mediating it. And afterward Vola came back to the inn with a headache and the expression of someone who has been patient for a very long time and is conserving their remaining patience carefully. Simon gave her tea and said nothing, which was the correct call. The Keth clan route expanded again, as Gorak had hoped, and Vola hired a secondary trader to handle the northern transit so she could remain at the Crossmark end, which meant she was training someone in the route management while also managing the main stall and advising two other Orc clan traders who had begun treating the Anvil and Ale as an informal trade consultation office, which meant Simon's common room on certain mornings looked more like a clan council than a tavern. He didn't mind. He made more soup. In the evenings, when the market was done and the inn was quiet, they sat on the porch that had become theirs in the specific way that places become yours when enough significant things have happened in them. She was always larger than the porch strictly accommodated, her long legs extended out past the bench's reach, her big hands wrapped around a mug, her shoulder warm against his. He read. She worked on small iron projects with the kit she'd brought inside from the stable, fine things, hinges and fittings, and sometimes, late in the year, things that were not practical at all but simply beautiful, small iron shapes that she made with the same precision she brought to everything, and which accumulated on the Anvil and Ale's windowsills. He asked her once what she thought about when she made them. She considered the question seriously, turning a small iron shape in her hands. It was an approximation of a bird, abstract and angular and exact. "I think about making something that will last," she said. "Iron is permanent if you treat it correctly. I like the idea of something I made still existing long after me." "It will," he said. She looked at him. "Yes," she said. She set the iron bird on the windowsill beside the others. He thought about lasting. He thought about the ways things last, the obvious ways, iron and stone and timber, and the less obvious ways, the patterns you build into a life by repeating them with intention. He thought about soup at midday and tea at evening, and the cellar key under the third board from the wall and the gray horse in the stable being his particular terrible self, and the mark on his left wrist that matched the marks on hers. The moment that the title promised built like a siege wall, leaning down to hear him, happened so many times, and in so many small versions that Simon eventually understood it, was not one moment but a posture. It was what Vola Steeljaw was to him, and had been from the first evening on the porch. Tremendous and specific and strong, and willing to bend toward him, willing to lean down and give his quiet voice her full attention with the particular quality that belongs to people who do not have to listen to anyone but choose to listen to you. Every time he spoke quietly, she leaned. Every time he said something low and honest, she turned toward it. She had the power to face away from everything, and she had chosen to face toward him. And this, more than the marks or the binding or any formal thing, was what made him certain. He told her this one night in autumn of the second year, sitting on the porch in the cooling air with the last of the market lanterns going out across the square. He said it quietly because he tended toward quiet, and she leaned down automatically, that signature move, her massive frame tilting toward his smaller one, and heard it. And when she straightened up, she was looking at the dark square with an expression he knew well by now. "I lean because I want to hear you," she said. "Every word." "I know," he said. "That's what I mean." She put her arm around his shoulders. It was not a delicate gesture. She was not built for delicate, but it was specific and warm and exactly his size, shaped to him by several months of practice, and he leaned into it the way you lean into something you have learned to trust completely. What came next was not a plan. It emerged from a conversation in the third autumn, when the market cycle ended, and Gorak's expansion had outgrown the Crossmark route, and there was talk of a new secondary market being established 2 days north, closer to the mountain pass, which would serve both the northern human settlements and the Orc clan territory adjacent to the pass road better than the current arrangement. Someone needed to set it up. Gorak's letter arrived with the proposal on a cold November morning. Vola read it and set it on the bar, and Simon read it and set it down, and they looked at each other. "It would mean time away from here," she said. "Yes. Setting up a new market is not a short process. It would take most of a year, possibly more. I know. You have the inn." He looked at the common room, the good shelves, the bar, the amber lanterns, the iron birds on the windowsills, the long memories of 6 years and the longer memories of the last 2 on top of them. He looked at Vola. "The inn can have a manager," he said. "Hardin's nephew wants work. He's competent." She looked at him. "You would leave the inn." "I would leave the inn in good hands and come with you," he said, "if you want me." She was quiet for a long moment. The look in her eyes was not the guarded, calculating look of the early days. It was the open look, younger and warmer and entirely present. "I always want you," she said. "That is something you should know by now." "I know," he said. "I was asking anyway because you get to choose." "I choose you," she said. "I chose you at the porch. I chose you at the chimney. I choose you right now." She paused. "You understand that this choosing is permanent. In Keth, once you have made the choice, you do not unmake it." "In Simon Shelby custom," he said. "Same." She almost smiled. She was getting better at fully smiling, and he loved watching the process. "Then we go north," she said. "We go north," he agreed. He hired Hardin's nephew, a steady young man named Pellet who had grown up in the market and knew the inn's rhythms instinctively, and spent 2 weeks training him and writing down everything he knew about the anvil and ale in a ledger that he handed over with the specific quiet solemnity of a person entrusting something precious. Pellet received it seriously. Simon believed he would do well. They loaded their gear on a cold December morning. Brack was deeply unhappy about the weather and made this known through the full range of his considerable vocal and physical repertoire, and Vola managed him with patient authority, while Simon secured his pack and checked the road provisions, and tried not to feel the particular sensation of watching the inn's familiar roofline from outside instead of inside, which was strange and correct simultaneously. Captain Marsh came to see them off. She stood in the stable yard with her hands on her belt, and her white scar eyebrow raised in the habitual expression she wore when she was feeling something she didn't intend to name. She shook Simon's hand and then looked at Vola and said, "The next garrison commander is going to have a significantly less interesting time." "I will try to send interesting correspondence," Vola said with perfect seriousness. Marsh made a sound that was approximately a laugh. She stepped back. "Safe roads," she said. "Safe roads," Simon replied. They rode out through the Thornwall gate in the early December morning, Vola on Brack's unpleasant back, and Simon on a sensible brown gelding named Ordinary that he had bought in the second year for exactly this kind of practicality. The gate clerk stamped them out with the same weary efficiency that the gate clerk always applied to everything, and they were on the pass road heading north before the market square had fully woken up. The north road in early winter was not comfortable and was entirely beautiful. The trees had gone bare except for the dark pines, and the pass opened before them in gradations of gray and white, and the air was the cold, specific air of mountains, and their breath made clouds in the stillness. Brack expressed his feelings about the temperature through his usual channels, and Vola rode him with the easy authority that was the only thing that worked. Simon rode Ordinary and thought about new markets and new roads and the particular quality of going somewhere with a person you intend to stay with. They were an hour out of Crossmark when Vola slowed Brack and looked at Simon with that expression, the open one, the young one. "Are you certain?" she said. He had been certain since the morning he crouched down at a market post with a key in his hand and looked up at a woman who was looking back at him with interest, calculating what he intended to decide. "I have been certain for a while now," he said. She looked at him steadily. Then she reached across the distance between their horses and held her marked wrist next to his, the marks side by side in the cold morning air, visible and specific and real. She did not say anything. She didn't need to. He put his hand over hers. They held it for a moment, their horses breathing in the cold, the pass road stretching north ahead of them toward something new and entirely theirs. Then Brack decided he had been patient long enough and expressed himself forcefully, and Vola dealt with him with one hand while keeping Simon's in the other for another moment. And then they rode on together into the winter morning, upward toward the mountain and the new market and everything that was coming, not because they had run away from anything, but because they were going toward it on purpose, chosen and choosing, marked and whole. The road was long and cold and very good. Ahead, the pass opened wide. Behind them, the anvil and ale stood at the crossroads with smoke coming from the chimney, properly fixed now, sealed against 3 winters, and Pellet was inside making soup from Simon's recipe, which he'd written down in the ledger along with everything else important. And the iron birds sat on the windowsills in the amber light, permanent as Vola had made them, shaped to last. And the 2 of them rode north together under the open winter sky, not looking back, not needing to, because what was behind them was safe and what was ahead was theirs.